Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, back with another Dark Shadows video for you guys and gals. I'm here to give my review of episode 25 from the beginning of DS, narrated by Alexander Mulkey Isles, written by Art Wallace, and directed by Leela Swift. Yep, Leela Swift returns as director on this episode, and I really love how they start this. You know, Vicky had received a letter that caused a bit of a stir with Liz, because Liz is worried that Vicky's going to find out about her past, and well, not so much. More so, she's going to poke about her past. More poke Liz and poke Roger. What Liz doesn't want really right at this moment in her life is if Vicky can poke holes in Roger or Liz's story that Roger was recommended Vicky by somebody, that's not a hole Liz needs poked in. And really, that's the set. Is that the centerpiece of this episode? That's one of the many. That's one of the centerpieces. The other centerpiece is obviously the bleeder valve, which I'll get into. Speaking of the letter, David Collins comes into Victoria's room, and the letter from the foundling home that is about Wilbur Strake inquiring into Victoria Winters, the Collins family hired her, is laying right on the desk. David comes in, he picks it up, he opens it to read it, and he doesn't really get a chance to read it because his dad, Roger Collins, played by Lewis Edmonds, walks in and he goes to take the letter from him, but David folds it up, pulls it back, and he goes, "You give me that letter. You give me that letter right now." And David obviously gives him the letter out of reluctancy. And he tries to tell David, you know, scold him a bit, but David isn't here. He walks out the room, and that's where the opening begins. I love how Leela Swift and Dan Curtis production shoot this next scene, because when that scene was ending, before we get the credits rolling, you see David Collins walk down the hall, and Roger Collins is following behind him. And when we come back from the credits opening up, you see David Hennessy's character, David Collins, try to close the door in his dad's face, but Roger's having none of it. He catches the door and he opens it. And he scolds him about reading the letter, but the letter had nothing to do with him. It had to do with Miss Winters. And David just says, "Well, you just want to send me to jail," and or just like, "David, that has nothing to do with this. This has nothing to do with going to jail." And he goes, "You want to send a person who caused your brakes to fail to send them to jail? That's completely different." The conversations between father and son are just amazing, because you have David who's so worried about getting found out about the bleeder valve, and his dad just like too busy to scold him about the letter to pick up on it. But one person has perhaps raised an eyebrow in David's direction. I'll get into that person here in a minute. So I just again, I really enjoyed the conversation between David Collins and Roger Collins. Roger Collins played by the late Lewis Edmonds. David Collins played by David Hennessy. Really, just great chemistry. You believe they're a father and a son. Especially ones that don't like each other. And speaking of the ultimate crime solver, no, it's not Constable Jonas Carter. It's Victoria Winters. She's going to be in this next scene here soon. The next scene actually takes place in the drawing room. We see Elizabeth on the phone that Roger has to sign the forms to release his car about the accident. So there is that. After that, we get Victoria Winters coming into the drawing room, and she's having a conversation with Elizabeth. And Victoria Winters says, "You know how you think that David, or that you and your brother think you know who tampered with his brakes? We do know who tampered with his brakes, Burke Devlin. Just in the prior episode, Victoria Winters saw how David Collins was reacting with the sheriff, with Constable Sheriff Jonas Carter. I know that's going to be weird for me to say, but I'll say it anyway. And saw him knock off the wrench. And to her, this casts a huge suspicion at David. And in many ways, she can't confirm that suspicion, but she's at least trying to mention to Elizabeth right here how David is behaving. That David has behaved ever since Constable Carter being here with the wrench. David has been behaving very strangely ever since his dad's, more strangely than what he usually behaves since his dad's accident. And that's something Victoria Winters is trying to tell Elizabeth, but before she can, because Vicky says, you know how the constable said you should try to think about who else would want to try to hurt your brother or murder your brother, and Roger comes into the room, Lewis, because Elizabeth says no one else would try to hurt Roger, and Roger's like, except for my loving son. The dialogue in Dark Shadows is just golden to a T. It really is. The writing is really well done. Art Wallace did a great job in these episodes. He doesn't get enough credit. But hey, the actors and actresses sold it to a T. So Roger, who has Vicky's letters in hand, he tells her, you need to keep this under lock and key. I caught it because Elizabeth's like, why do you have Miss Winter's letter? Like, why do you have her letter? Why? And he explains that David had it. He got it off of him. He hands it back to Victoria, saying, you need to keep this under lock and key. We've already learned that lock and key necessarily don't work with David. Especially since Carolyn has a duplicate key to the one drawer in Vicky's room. So really, with lock and key just would not work. This is bad advice from Roger. It just is. It's horrible advice. Vicky tries to ask oh, didn't your sister tell you about this letter? Oh no, we were just and Elizabeth so quickly dismisses Vicky, gets her out there. He goes, oh, we'll talk later about David. You go now. You go back to teaching David's lessons. But you heard what I said. And gets her out the door and closes the drawing room doors. And Roger's like, I must admire you. I admire you, Liz. You have a interesting, or he wants to say unique way of managing people. And he says, she turns and she goes, I hope I could do the same with you. Meaning manage him, the Zinner. It's really good. We go up to David Collins' room. So this lets you know that Vicky is thorough at her job. She's not, yes, she is here for herself and to find out about her past, but she does care enough about David to try to work with him and go back to her work. And she does go back to her work. She goes up to David's room, and that's where we get this next scene. David Collins and Vicky are in David's room. Victoria Winters is trying to teach young David about history. David is more asking about jail, crime and punishment. He's also asking about the letter too, more so. He thinks the letter was in there for him. Vicky's like, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. David is paranoid. Vicky also brings to David's attention about, about the magazines that letter is just important to her as those magazines are to him. And I love that sort of setup there, how they set that up. And really great job by the writers and the actors. Just great job. And she goes over, she gets the magazines that David, and they're mechanic magazines, how to reassemble and how to disassemble and reassemble certain parts of a car, like a brake cylinder, bleeder valve, whatever you want to say. David has been let's just say this. David is really into the auto body experience. Okay. And David just brushes her. In a sense, he deflects. Really, that's something the characters are really good too here with Dark Shadows. You've heard of characters deflecting in other series. David, the characters in Dark Shadows do a great job of deflecting. And David deflects. He goes, you just want to see me taken away." And she goes, "No, I don't." He tells her, David tells Victoria, "You just want me to go to that foundling home, and you don't care if my father sends me there." And she goes, "David, he couldn't send you to that foundling home even if he wanted to. It's for people who don't have parents." And then David's like, "I did not tamper with my father's vehicle." And she goes, "David, I don't remember accusing you of that." And she didn't either. Oh my God. We go back to the drawing room, and Roger and Liz are having a conversation. You know, they know who made inquiries. They know more specifically, Liz and Roger do, who hired Wilbur Strake, and they know that it was Burke Devlin. They don't need the evidence, but if they can, Roger feels if they can produce evidence that Burke did hire a private investigator, it shows that Burke didn't just come here to pay a visit and be nice. And that's what Roger wants. He goes, "Well, why don't we call the sheriff and have him make inquiries too, about this guy, and we can show him the letter." Liz wants none of that. She goes, "Nope." And he goes, "Are you serious?" He goes, "I almost died here." Again, you got to look at it from Roger's standpoint too, Tutory. Roger, no matter what you tell him, until a certain point, knows it was Burke, or at least he feels it was Burke Devlin. We know it wasn't. Um, Liz is having none of it. She doesn't want involved. And I love the line where eventually Liz tells him, "I don't want it, where people were making inquiries about her. No one needs to know why I hired her." And Roger's like, "Well, why did you hire her? Why did you send for someone all the way up from Collinsport, Maine? Bring someone from New York to Collinsport, Maine," basically is what he's saying. And he goes, she goes, "I thought she was qualified for the job. You know." He goes, "But how could you know that? You haven't been out the house in 18 years. Now, I don't think this is a line flub by Lewis Edmonds at all. Now, what he really means by out the house, he means off the grounds. And really, so you'll hear a lot of characters say that in Dark Shadows. "Oh, she hasn't been out the house in 18 years. And even Vicky says about this. She goes, "Your mom hasn't left here in 18 years. She goes, "Oh, she hasn't left the grounds. She leaves the house." But you'll hear Carolyn say something, address this. I think it may have already been addressed in an episode, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't quite yet. You'll hear Carolyn address it, that, and it's not in this episode because Carolyn is not in this episode, but you'll hear Carolyn say, "No, she doesn't leave the grounds. She does leave the house," which that's true. Um, you know, she does. Elizabeth does leave the house, and Liz. He goes, "So why did you recommend her?" He goes, "I only recommended her on what you told me, Roger." And Roger's like, "Now you're making no sense. You told me that somebody out from the Hammond Foundling Home recommended you to her, recommended you, recommended her to you, and that's what you told me, and that's what I went by, and that's what I want you to tell Miss Winters. You'll have to think of the rest." And Roger's like, "Oh, I see now." I love Lewis Edmonds' laughter because he's like, "Are you crazy?" in a sense, but he rolls with it. He goes, "Okay, I'll cave to that. Now I want the real story." She goes, I've told you the real story." He goes, "No, Liz, all you've told me is hocus pocus. I want the real truth. Why did you really hire this woman?" And she goes, "It's a private matter." And that's where she wants to drop that. And she threatens Roger if he presses it or doesn't tell Vicky what she wants. If Roger doesn't tell Vicky what Liz wants, Roger will be thrown out the house. He'll have nowhere to live. And Liz means that. I mean, this is a woman who, again, she's the matriarch. She's the boss. She's in charge. And she is damn sure somebody who is not going to be messed with by her brother, by Burke Devlin, by some foundling home, by some woman from foundling home. Elizabeth could be more lethal than a Ric Flair chop. Okay, that's all I'll say. She's rough. She's rough around the edges. So after this, we go right back to David's room, and David answers a history question, and David apologizes for calling Victoria Winters a liar. She says, "I just rather not talk about it, David." And he says, "Well, I am sorry." And he goes, "I'd rather not talk." She says, "I'd rather not talk about it." Roger enters the room, and you see, he asked Vicky if she could speak to him, if he still has a letter, and she goes, "Yeah, it's still in my room. Do you want me to go?" He goes, "No, but I do want to talk to you about it." And she says, "Dave, I'm sure David won't mind." And they do talk about it. And what's interesting is they leave David's room and they go all the way downstairs into the drawing room. This is just a really, really interesting, whether you want to call it a trope or theme for Dark Shadows, that a lot of conversations don't necessarily always take place in the hallway. Yeah, that happens, but a lot of the major conversations take place in the drawing room of the Great House. You'll see major conversations take place other places, like the Blue Whale, but a lot of it, when it involves the Collins family directly like this, it takes place in the drawing room, and you'll see that. So Roger tells Vicky that yes, he received a recommendation, and I love Victoria Winters here because she does a really good job. Now, I checked with the Fallon home. Perhaps you didn't know that. Your sister seemed confused about all this, and so did you when I first mentioned it to you. And he said, "Well, I had a lot on my mind." That's how he plays it off. But he also tells her that that from living in the Fallon home, that it's backed by a lot of donors, it receives a lot of anonymous donations from people who wish to remain anonymous. Well, a woman who lives in New York, I can't say her name, was impressed by you more than once and recommended you to me. And as she goes to press it, the phone rings, and it's Constable Jonas Carter. Roger isn't happy with the constable not arresting Burke, hands up, calls him an idiot, and he storms off. Vicky goes back upstairs. She goes to her room to look at the letter. It's not there because there is another scene of David going back into Vicky's room, which I skipped over on purpose to build some suspense, but I didn't do a good job of it. While they're having the conversation, to be fair, or at least going downstairs to have the conversation, David sneaks back in and he takes the Victoria's note and he goes into the West Wing. David goes into the West Wing. And when Vicky comes back up, she sees her note is gone. She knows it was David, right? She goes into his room. Vicky just feels he hid the letter in his room again. So she's looking, and she looks into the top drawer where the bleeder valve is, and guess what she finds? The bleeder valve of Roger's car. She gives a look like, "Oh my God, I was right." And I'd give that same look too. Really, really, really good episode. Just another gem. Look, the Dark Shadows beginning episodes are fun to watch. Don't just write them off as boring, because they're not. They're very entertaining. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the review of episode 25. I will see you later.